I am Nia. I am 32 years old. They say your wedding day is supposed to be the most magical moment of your life, but as I walked down the long, velvet-lined aisle of the largest megachurch in Atlanta, my fairy tale felt more like a crime scene. I was wearing a custom $20,000 silk gown hand-stitched with imported lace, but the only thing the 500 guests could stare at was the swollen, dark purple bruise covering my left eye. The sanctuary was dead silent, save for the collective gasp that rippled through the pews as my father handed me off at the altar. My fiance, Marcus, stood across from me. At 35, he was the golden boy of the city commercial real estate scene. A proud Morehouse graduate from a family with deep pockets and even deeper political connections. He stood there in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, radiating an arrogance that made my stomach turn. He did not look ashamed. He did not look apologetic. Instead, he leaned in close, his breath warm and aggressive against my cheek, smiled perfectly for the cameras, and whispered that I needed to learn a lesson. Then he looked down at the front pew where my mother Vivian sat perfectly composed in her designer suit. He gave her a subtle nod, and to my absolute horror, my own mother nodded back in approval. Some guests in the front rows saw this exchange and quickly looked away, choosing to ignore the violence staring them right in the face. I said nothing and let the ceremony continue. But right before we exchanged our vows, I did something that shattered their perfect illusion forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to burn down a toxic family dynamic to build your own empire. To understand the sweet taste of what I was about to do, you need to understand the suffocating world I grew up in. My mother Vivian had spent my entire life reminding me that I was the ultimate disappointment of the Washington family. We were part of the black elite in Atlanta, a world where social standing, country club memberships, and appearances meant everything. My sister Chloe was the golden child, perfectly molding herself into the high society image my mother demanded. I, on the other hand, was the black sheep. I preferred writing code-building software and staying out of the spotlight. I never cared for the galas or the gossip. To my mother, my independence was a disease, and Marcus was the cure. She believed that marrying a wealthy, prominent man would finally fix me. When I showed up to the bridal suite that morning with blood on my lip and a swollen eye, my mother did not ask if I was safe. She did not offer me a hug or tell me we needed to call the police. She simply locked the door, handed me a bottle of heavy coverage foundation, and told me that a battered daughter married to a wealthy man was a far better accessory than a single woman who dared to have a mind of her own. She told me to dry my tears and walk down that aisle because the Washington family reputation was more important than my safety. She thought she had broken my spirit. Marcus thought he had broken my will. They both severely underestimated me. Standing at the altar, the air inside the sanctuary was thick with the scent of white roses and expensive perfume. The politicians, business moguls, and elite social circles my family fought so desperately to impress were all staring at me. The pastor cleared his throat, stepping up to the microphone. His voice echoed through the massive speakers, asking the congregation to bow their heads in a moment of prayer before we exchanged our sacred vows. The silence in the megachurch was sudden and heavy. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my mind was completely still. I did not cry. I did not shake. I had spent the last 12 hours planning the exact sequence of events that was about to unfold, calculating every single move to absolute perfection. While Marcus and my mother thought I was crying in my room last night, I was actually setting a trap they would never be able to escape. I lifted my head and looked straight past Marcus, completely ignoring his arrogant smirk. My eyes scanned the vast room, looking over the sea of designer hats and tailored suits, until I found the audiovisual technician sitting in the glass booth at the very back of the balcony. We locked eyes, and I gave a slow, deliberate nod. The pastor opened his mouth to begin the traditional reading of the vows, but the massive digital screens flanking the altar suddenly flickered to life. A confused murmur swept through the crowd. I am sure everyone in the pews expected to see a romantic video montage to distract from the awkward tension in the room. Perhaps a slideshow of our engagement trip to Martha Vineyard, or perfectly curated photos of a happy couple set to a slow, soulful song. My mother sat up straighter, adjusting her pearls, ready to smile at the screen. Instead, the screens displayed a harsh black and white security feed. A bold digital timestamp in the bottom right corner indicated the footage was from 10:30 the previous night. The romantic lighting in the church suddenly felt incredibly cold as the giant screens broadcasted raw, unedited security camera footage from Marcus' private office. The entire congregation fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop in that massive room. On the giant screens, Marcus was pacing furiously around his heavy mahogany desk. Then the frame captured me walking into his office, holding a stack of legal documents. The guests in the front rows leaned forward, their mouths falling slightly open in shock as they realized what they were watching. It was not a memory of love. It was the prologue to a takedown. The crisp audio of the security footage cracked through the church speakers like a gunshot. On the giant screens hovering above us, the black and white image showed Marcus towering over me in his private office. His face, the exact same face that had just smiled warmly at the pastor, was twisted in raw, unhinged rage. He slammed a thick stack of papers onto his mahogany desk and screamed at me to sign them. I watched myself on the screen, calmly standing my ground, telling him I would never sign a blank guarantee to bail out his failing real estate developments. The microphone picked up his voice perfectly as he yelled that he owned me, that my company was his ticket out of bankruptcy. Then came the sound that made 500 high society guests gasp in unison. A sharp, sickening smack echoed through the sanctuary. The footage showed Marcus pulling his arm back and striking me across the face with so much force that I crashed hard onto the hardwood floor. In the pews, several women shrieked. Men shifted uncomfortably in their tailored suits, but the true horror, the absolute betrayal that I wanted every single person in Atlanta to witness, was just about to happen. The heavy office door on the screen swung open. My mother Vivian stepped into the frame. The entire congregation held its collective breath. They expected to see a mother rush to her daughter to scream at the man who had just assaulted her child. Instead, the screens showed Vivian casually closing the door behind her. She looked down at me, bleeding on the floor, then looked at Marcus and let out an exasperated sigh. Her voice, usually dripping with sweet southern charm, cut through the church speakers with icy precision. "Get up, Nia," she ordered, not even offering me a hand. "Go to the bathroom and fix your makeup right now." The Washington family does not accept canceled weddings, especially not from a failure like you. A collective wave of shock ripped through the church. I could hear people murmuring my mother's name in disbelief. But the video Vivian was not finished. She crossed her arms, staring down at my bruised face on the monitor. "It is an absolute blessing that a man of his stature is even willing to marry you." She spat, her words dripping with pure disdain. "You are lucky Marcus is taking you off my hands. Do not you dare ruin my reputation and embarrass me in front of my church over a little slap. Now dry your eyes and act like you belong in this family." That single minute of footage did what I could never do with words. It stripped away 32 years of my mother's flawless philanthropic facade. It showed the world exactly how she viewed me, not as a daughter, but as a defective piece of property. She was desperate to sell off to the highest bidder to maintain her precious social status. Every time she had praised my sister Chloe as the golden child, while ignoring my achievements, every time she had told me I was too difficult, too stubborn, too independent, it all culminated in her watching me bleed and only caring about her country club image. The digital screens faded to black, plunging the altar into a heavy, suffocating tension. The silence lasted for only a fraction of a second before the sanctuary exploded into absolute chaos. The pristine, polite society of Atlanta unraveled before my eyes. People were shouting, pointing fingers, and whispering frantically. I turned my gaze from the blank screens to the front pew. My mother was sitting frozen, her perfect posture completely rigid, her face drained of all color. The women sitting next to her had physically leaned away, treating her like she was suddenly contagious. Then a guttural roar tore through the noise. Marcus had realized that his reputation, his career, and his entire future had just been publicly executed. His political connections and family money could never erase the high-definition proof of his violence. The panic in his eyes instantly morphed into violent primal rage. "You ruined me!" he screamed, the veins in his neck bulging against his crisp tuxedo collar. He completely forgot where he was. He forgot the pastor, the guests, and the cameras. He lunged at me, throwing his entire body weight forward, his hands reaching directly for my throat to choke the life out of me right there on the holy altar. I did not flinch. I did not even take a step back. Before Marcus could close the 2 feet between us, the heavy velvet curtains behind the choir loft violently ripped open. 2 massive, towering bodyguards in sharp black suits exploded onto the altar. They moved with terrifying speed. The first bodyguard hit Marcus square in the chest, stopping his momentum instantly, while the second grabbed his shoulders and swept his legs out from under him. The sickening thud of Marcus hitting the solid marble floor echoed louder than his screams. The bodyguards pinned him face down, pressing their knees into his back and twisting his arms behind him in a brutal, unbreakable hold. Marcus thrashed wildly against the cold stone, cursing and spitting, but he was completely immobilized. I stood above him, looking down at the man who thought he could buy my submission, my face perfectly calm as he writhed in the dust of his own making. The entire sanctuary erupted into a deafening roar of overlapping screams and frantic gasps. Women in custom fascinators gripped their pearls, while men in sharp suits scrambled backward in their pews, as if the altar had suddenly caught fire. The illusion of the untouchable Washington family was officially in ruins, and the stench of our dirty laundry was suffocating the room. Beneath the heavy knees of my private security, Marcus continued to thrash. He spat out vicious curses, his face pressed hard against the cold, unforgiving marble. He demanded to be released, but my men did not move a single muscle. They were paid exceptionally well to follow my orders and mine alone. Before I could even take a breath to savor the moment, the sharp clatter of designer heels echoed up the marble steps. It was Chloe, my older sister, and the undisputed golden child of the Washington family. She hiked up her extravagant silk maid of honor gown, sprinting toward the altar with a look of absolute horror on her flawless face. She was a renowned pediatrician who had built her entire identity on being perfect, but right now she looked completely unhinged. Right behind her was her husband, Trent. Trent was 36 years old, a Wall Street finance executive who had married into our black elite family, but always treated us like we were some sort of charity case. He was gracing with his presence. He was a white man who wore his privilege like a weapon, constantly parading his corporate superiority at our family dinners. He loved to speak down to me, treating my tech company like a cute little hobby while he moved imaginary money around on a trading floor. Today, he wore a bespoke silver suit that probably cost more than a luxury car, and his face was red with unearned authority. Chloe reached me first. She shoved her way past the pastor, who was frozen in shock, clutching his Bible to his chest. She did not look at my bruised face. She did not look at the giant screens that had just broadcasted my brutal assault. She only looked at the guests. She only cared about the catastrophic damage to her perfect social standing. "You are completely out of your mind, Nia," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You have always been insanely jealous of my perfect life, and now you have to destroy your own wedding just to get some sick attention. You are a sociopath. You are humiliating Mother in front of the governor, the mayor, and half the city council. How could you do this to us?" She reached out as if to grab my shoulders and shake me, but my icy glare stopped her dead in her tracks. My absolute stillness seemed to infuriate her even more. She turned to her husband, tears of profound embarrassment streaming down her face, demanding that he fix this disaster immediately. She needed her white knight to swoop in and silence her difficult sister. Trent did not hesitate to play the savior. He stepped squarely in front of Chloe, puffing out his chest and using his booming corporate voice, the one he reserved for intimidating junior analysts and waitstaff. He stepped into my personal space, trying to tower over me. He pointed a manicured finger, stopping just an inch from my nose. "You are an absolute lunatic. Nia?" He barked, his face contorted with rage. "You are single-handedly destroying the reputation of this entire family over a minor domestic dispute. You think you are so clever with your little computer tricks, but this is the real world. You are playing a very dangerous game with very powerful people, and you are going to lose everything." I looked at his finger hovering near my face, and then I looked him dead in the eye. I did not blink. I did not step back. I let the heavy silence stretch, forcing him to fill the void with his arrogant threats. "Tell your hired thugs to let Marcus go right this second," Trent demanded, his voice echoing through the hidden microphone clipped to my wedding dress. He looked down at the two massive bodyguards, fully expecting them to instantly obey a finance executive barking orders in a southern megachurch. When my men did not even flinch or acknowledge his existence, Trent turned a deep mottled shade of purple. "I swear to God, Nia, if you do not tell them to stand down right now, I am calling the police," he threatened, pulling a sleek gold smartphone from the inner pocket of his jacket. "I will have you thrown in a jail cell for defamation, for assault, and for corporate espionage. I have the most expensive lawyers in Atlanta on retainer, and I will personally see to it that your pathetic little IT company is sued into absolute oblivion. You will be bankrupt and sitting behind bars before midnight." The sheer arrogance of his words hung heavily in the dead air of the sanctuary. The congregation watched in stunned fascination as he stood there holding his phone like a loaded weapon. He fully believed he was the savior of the Washington family name. He thought his money, his gender, and his unearned confidence gave him the ultimate authority to command the room and silence the abused sister. He expected me to crumble under his booming voice. He expected me to cry, or to beg for his forgiveness and beg for mercy. Instead, I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the slow, calculating smile of a woman who had already won the war before the opposing general even realized the battle had begun. I lifted my hands perfectly steady and slowly adjusted the diamond tiara resting on my hair, making sure it sat perfectly straight against my veil. I smoothed out the front of my heavy silk wedding gown, took a deep, steadying breath, and leaned slightly toward him. "There is absolutely no need for you to make that call, Trent," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm, echoing crystal clear over the hushed congregation. "You can put your phone away." Trent scoffed, a smug look of victory immediately washing over his face. He actually thought I was backing down. He thought I was terrified of his legal threats and his financial power. "See, Chloe," he muttered over his shoulder to my sister. "She is all bark and no bite." I kept my eyes locked on his, watching the false confidence radiate from his posture. I let him enjoy his imaginary victory for exactly 3 seconds before I pulled the rug out from under him and obliterated his entire reality. "You do not need to call them," I continued, my voice slicing through his arrogance like a freshly sharpened blade, "because the police are already standing at the front doors of the church. But let me assure you, Trent, they are definitely not here to arrest me." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary swung open with a resounding crash. 6 uniformed Atlanta police officers marched down the center aisle, their heavy boots echoing against the marble floor. The congregation parted like the Red Sea, falling into a stunned, breathless silence. Trent actually smiled. His chest puffed out even further, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who thought he had just won. He lowered his smartphone and gave me a condescending nod, fully believing that my rebellion was over. My mother, Vivian, practically leaped from the front pew. The color returned to her face as she saw her salvation approaching in blue uniforms. She immediately turned on the waterworks, producing theatrical tears that would have won her an Oscar. "Officer, thank God you are here," she cried out, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. "You need to arrest my daughter immediately. She has had a complete mental breakdown. She is delusional, violent, and she hired these thugs to attack her fiance at the altar. Please cuff her before she hurts anyone else." The lead detective, a tall man with a stern expression and graying temples, did not even break his stride. He walked right past my mother, completely ignoring her hysterical performance. He marched up the altar steps, stepped right around me, and looked down at Marcus, who was still pinned to the floor by my security team. The detective gave my men a brief nod. "Let him up," he ordered. The bodyguards hauled Marcus to his feet, keeping a firm grip on his arms. Marcus adjusted his tuxedo jacket, trying to muster whatever shred of dignity he had left. "Detective, I am Marcus Washington. My father is Senator Washington. This is a massive misunderstanding caused by a hysterical woman." But the detective was already pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Marcus Washington, you are under arrest for felony domestic battery and aggravated assault." The detective announced, his voice booming through the silent church. "You have the right to remain silent." Marcus went completely rigid. The color drained from his face as the cold steel clicked around his wrists. "You cannot do this," he stammered, panic finally replacing his arrogance. "This is a private matter. There is no police report." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, until I was looking directly into his terrified eyes. "There is a report," Marcus Y said softly but loud enough for the microphone to catch every syllable. "I filed it at 3 o'clock this morning. I sent the unedited security footage directly to the chief of police along with the medical records from the hospital visit I had to make last night. And just to be completely certain, nothing was swept under the rug by your father and his political friends. I also sent the file to every major news outlet in the state. By the time you reach the precinct, your face will be on every television screen in Atlanta." The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled, and for a second, the golden boy of Atlanta real estate looked like a terrified, helpless child. The officers grabbed him by the arms and began marching him down the aisle. The same aisle I was supposed to walk down as his submissive, battered wife. Instead, he was being paraded in handcuffs past his business partners, his politician friends, and his country club peers. He shouted curses at me, threatening to ruin my life, but his words were drowned out by the frantic whispers of the 500 guests who were already pulling out their phones to check the news. As the church doors closed behind Marcus and the police, the reality of the situation settled over the altar. Chloe was openly weeping, her perfectly contoured makeup ruined, clinging to Trent's arm as if the world was ending. Trent, however, quickly composed himself. He adjusted his expensive silver tie, cleared his throat, and looked at me with a sneer of absolute disgust. He was desperate to distance himself from the toxic fallout that was about to obliterate the Washington family name. "You really think you did something profound today?" Nia, Trent scoffed, shaking his head. "All you did was embarrass yourself and ruin a perfectly good Saturday. Marcus was a fool for getting caught, but you are an even bigger fool for destroying your only chance at a decent life. You are just a bitter, lonely IT worker who had to burn down a church to feel important. But none of this touches me or my wife. We are leaving." I watched him turn his back on me, his arrogance completely untouched by the carnage around him. I let him take exactly 2 steps before I spoke. I smiled a genuine cold smile and adjusted my tiara one last time. "Enjoy that custom Zegna suit, Trent," I said, my voice dripping with lethal sweetness. "Because it is the nicest thing you will be wearing before you trade it for an orange prison jumpsuit." The color completely drained from Trent's face. His arrogant smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. "What are you talking about?" He snapped, his voice losing its booming authoritative edge. "Stop playing games, Nia. You do not know the first thing about high-level finance. You are a glorified bookkeeper." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The heavy silk of my gown rustled against the floor, sounding like a drawn sword in the quiet room. "I am not an accountant, Trent," I said softly, my eyes locking onto his. "I never was. I am a software engineer. And for the last 5 years, I have been building predictive algorithmic models for institutional trading." Trent scoffed, trying to mask his growing unease with a forced barking laugh. "So what? You wrote a cute little program. That does not change the fact that I control billions of dollars in assets. You are nothing to me." I tilted my phone screen so he could see it. It was not a simple accounting app. It was a live top-tier encrypted dashboard showing massive catastrophic liquidations. "Trent," I said, keeping my tone terrifyingly polite. "Did you really think Marcus was marrying me because he liked my personality? He was bankrupt. His real estate empire was drowning in toxic debt, and he needed a massive injection of untraceable capital to save his own skin. He found out about my company. He found out what it was truly worth." My mother stepped forward, her brow furrowed in confusion. Vivian had no idea what I was talking about. She only understood country club dues and designer labels. "What nonsense is this?" she demanded. "Marcus comes from old money. He is wealthy. He does not need anything from you." "He needed everything from me, Mother," I shot back, not breaking eye contact with Trent. Because 3 weeks ago my tech firm was quietly acquired by a global financial conglomerate for $300 million. Chloe actually gasped, her hands dropping from her face. Vivian stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the velvet armchair as if I had physically struck her. 300 million, Vivian whispered the number, rendering her entirely breathless. But Trent was not looking at Vivian or Chloe. He was staring at the screen of my phone, his eyes wide with absolute primal terror. He recognized the specific ticker symbols flashing red on my dashboard. He recognized the exact holding accounts that were currently bleeding out. "You see, Trent?" I continued, my voice steady and merciless. When Marcus realized I would not willingly sign over my company to save his failing developments, he got desperate. He reached out to his good friend, a brilliant Wall Street executive, to help him set up a series of highly leveraged, extremely illegal shell corporations. The plan was to siphon my company's assets immediately after the wedding, using my signature on those blank guarantee forms he tried to beat out of me last night. Trent was physically shaking now. His perfectly tailored Zegna suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for him. "How do you know about that?" he whispered, the confident corporate titan completely vanishing before my eyes. "Because I built the security architecture you tried to bypass," I replied. Stepping so close I could smell the expensive cologne and cold sweat radiating off his skin. "You thought you were hacking a simple accounting firm. You did not realize you were stepping into a digital bear trap. I have been tracking your illegal transfers for the last 3 months, Trent. Every shell company, every offshore account, every single dime you embezzled from your own clients to help Marcus cover his tracks." Trent opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a man standing on the tracks watching a freight train bear down on him. "And that phone call you were just threatening to make?" I asked, gesturing to the sleek gold smartphone he was still gripping in his hand. "You might want to hold off on that. Because while you were standing at the altar threatening to freeze my non-existent lease, my automated security protocol was executing a complete data dump. Every illegal transaction, every forged document, and every piece of communication between you and Marcus was just sent directly to the SEC, the FBI, and the senior partners at your firm." "No," Trent breathed, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. No, you cannot do this. You are lying. You are bluffing. Check your phone, Trent," I offered smoothly. He fumbled with his device, his hands trembling so violently he nearly dropped it. He unlocked the screen, and I watched his entire world collapse in real time. His inbox was flooded with urgent, frantic messages from his firm. Missed calls from his senior partners were stacking up by the second. An email from his compliance department sat at the very top, the subject line reading "Urgent, immediate suspension and investigation." Trent dropped the phone. It hit the carpet with a dull thud. He fell to his knees right there in the bridal suite, grabbing the edges of my silk gown, all traces of his white male privilege and corporate superiority entirely gone. "Nia, please," he begged, tears streaming down his face, completely ignoring his wife, who was watching him in horrified silence. "Please, you have to undo this. They will send me to federal prison. I will lose everything. Please, I will do anything. I am family." I looked down at him, feeling nothing but a profound, absolute emptiness. For 32 years, these people had treated me like dirt beneath their shoes. They had demanded my compliance, mocked my independence, and literally stood by while a man beat me, all in the name of preserving their precious status. I gently but firmly pulled my gown from his grasp and took a step back. "You should have thought about family when you were helping a man try to steal my life," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the small room. I turned to the heavy oak doors, grabbed the brass handle, and looked back at my mother and sister one last time. They were standing frozen, looking at the crying man on the floor, their entire universe of wealth, status, and perfection lying in ruins around them. "Goodbye, Mother," I said. "Have a beautiful afternoon." I pulled the door open and walked out of the bridal suite, leaving the toxicity, the abuse, and the Washington family legacy burning in the ashes behind me. The silence following my words to Trent was thick and suffocating, but it only lasted for a heartbeat. A sudden piercing shriek shattered the quiet of the sanctuary. It was Chloe. Seeing her husband, the man who provided her with her lavish lifestyle and untouchable social status, reduced to a weeping, broken mess on the altar floor, was too much for her fragile ego to process. Her perfect, curated reality was disintegrating. and her immediate instinct was to destroy the person holding the mirror. She lunged at me. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She raised her hand, her manicured fingers curled into claws, aiming directly for the dark, swollen bruise that Marcus had left on my face the night before. But she never even came close. The second bodyguard, who had just finished watching the police drag Marcus out the heavy oak doors, moved with lightning speed. He stepped smoothly between us, catching Chloe by the wrists before she could land a single blow. He did not hurt her, but he held her in a grip of iron, creating an impenetrable wall of solid muscle between my sister and me. Chloe thrashed against him like a wild animal, her expensive silk gown tangling around her legs, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. "Let me go!" she screamed, struggling violently against the bodyguard. "You ruin everything, Nia. You have always been jealous of me. You are nothing but a pathetic, jealous piece of trash. You had to burn down your own wedding and ruin my husband because you cannot stand the fact that I am better than you. I am a successful doctor. I am a pillar of this community. And you are just a failure who had to invent some ridiculous lie about a tech company to get attention." I stood perfectly still, letting her scream until her voice grew hoarse. I looked at the congregation. The 500 guests were watching this spectacle with a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. Then I looked back at Chloe. I felt a strange, absolute calmness wash over me. For my entire life, I had swallowed my pride to protect her image. I had shrunk myself down so she could shine. That ended today. A successful doctor. I repeated, my voice amplified by the microphone cutting cleanly through her hysterical sobbing. "Let us talk about that medical career of yours, Chloe. Let us talk about exactly how you became the golden child of the Washington family." My mother, Vivian, suddenly stood up from the front pew. Her face was chalk white. "Nia, stop this right now," she commanded, trying to use that old, familiar tone of authority that had kept me in line for 3 decades. "Do not say another word. This is family business." I turned my gaze to Vivian, feeling the last remaining threads of my daughterly obligation snap and wither away. "Family business?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You mean like the family business we conducted in the kitchen when I was 18 years old?" I looked back at the crowd, then at Trent, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, staring up at us with a blank, shell-shocked expression. "I want you all to know exactly what kind of doctor my sister is," I announced, my voice ringing out across the vast room. When we were teenagers, our grandfather Theodore left a substantial college trust fund to be divided equally between Chloe and me. It was enough to pay for our entire higher education. But when Chloe got accepted into a prestigious, wildly expensive medical school, my half of the trust fund suddenly was not mine anymore. I looked directly at my mother. "Do you remember what you told me that night, Vivian?" You sat me down at the kitchen table, slid a legal waiver in front of me, and handed me a pen. You told me that I needed to drop out of my software engineering program. You said that Chloe was the smart one, the true investment. The goal